President Cyril Ramaphosa is next month expected to launch the Border Management Authority in Beitbridge. More than 45,000 people traveling between South Africa and Zimbabwe were processed at the Beitbridge Border Post in Musina, Limpopo. This was during the Easter holidays earlier this year. Now, the Department of Home Affairs has since lobbied for more technology resources for the Border Management Authority. Perhaps to understand what all this entails, with the Commissioner of the Border Management Authority, Dr. Micheal Masiapato. He's joining us live in studio. Dr. Micheal, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, Lizelle, and thanks for the opportunity.
We're obviously looking at the current challenges surrounding border control. Perhaps you could speak to the approach and the focus at this point that has been adopted by Cabinet.
Firstly, I think you will be aware that for the past 29 years as a country, we have been actually deploying a multi-agency approach in terms of border management, where we had a number of departments at the port of entry doing a number of different functions as per their departmental mandates. But what we have actually now done with the passing of the Border Management Authority Act in July of 2020, we had effectively adopted an integrated approach where we are effectively exiting those multiple departments on the ports of entry and then integrating them into a single authority, and that is Border Management Authority. So up to this point, I can indicate that from the 1st of April, we had already started doing that integration. So we integrated around 1,200 officials who used to work for the Department of Home Affairs doing immigration work in the ports, and they are now working for the Border Management Authority as the immigration officials. We have done around 308 or so from the Department of Agriculture who are now in the Border Management Authority doing agriculture-related functions. And we've done the same with those that came from the Department of Health who are doing port health functions at the ports. And lastly, we integrated those that came from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. They are dealing with biosecurity at the ports. So the major shift is basically moving away from a multiple agencies into a single authority. That is a border law enforcement authority in its own right as a Schedule 3A public entity, primarily responsible for implementing border management laws across the various streams with a single commander at the port of entry.
Thank you for that clarity. We're trying to understand, how it's going to operate. So it's a centralized approach.
Yeah.
Given the issues that we've had in terms of immigration and trade, how is this going to solve the issues that we've been facing over the past years then?
So firstly, if we can talk about issues of immigration. So the first part obviously is facilitating and managing the legitimate movement of persons in and out of the Republic. And when we talk immigration in this instance is to make sure that only those people that are having requisite documents are able to come into in the Republic, whether in terms of passports, but also even in terms of the visas that are supposed to come with visas and all of those kind of issues. So firstly, I will say that the kind of intended investment that the country is intending to make in terms of facilitating all of those issues, particularly in terms of enhancing our movement control systems and all of those issues, that is going to facilitate the entire process. But when we talk about movement of persons, we don't just talk only on immigration issues. We also talk about port health functions, meaning there must be healthy people. But secondly, we talk about their functions in terms of agriculture, meaning that they need to be traveling with authorized agricultural products. There are those that are authorized to come in and there are those that are not authorized to carry through. So on that basis, we are integrating all the various operating procedures that were done in the port in a fragmented manner into a single standard operating procedures. That on its own is going to facilitate better movement of persons. But maybe again around issues of immigration, the biggest challenge we've been having is people who have been avoiding using the ports of entry but going into the vulnerable segments on the borderline. So in those areas, we are then to be deploying statically members of the border guards, or actually the border guards who are officials of the Border Management Authority. The intention is to be there to make sure that we deal with the issues of illegal movements into the Republic. In terms of trade, that is the most critical one, and we have started making strides in as far as trade movement is concerned. I think you might have seen in the past year or so, working with SARS, we have started to make sure that there is a streamlined movement in terms of trade in between South Africa and our neighboring countries. Beitbridge, as we speak now, those issues about congestions of trucks and all of those issues is fairly addressed. And we've been dealing with those issues consciously to address those. The only area that we're still putting more effort on is in terms of Limpopo, as you will know, because of the high volumes that are going that way. But we are actually on the ground with SARS to make sure that we actually address that, working together with our neighboring countries.
I'm imagining technology plays a role in executing all of this. And perhaps you could talk to the technological upgrades for the single command system that's been implemented. How does the issue of load shedding affect your operations then at this point?
Yeah, so firstly, I will say that in terms of borders, lucky enough, we hadn't necessarily been having challenges in terms of load shedding. And the reason for that is because even before load shedding, we had always invested in as far as the border environment into high-tech, what do you call the machines again?
High-tech machinery?
No, yeah, the machines that kicks in when electricity goes off.
Backup systems.
Yeah, backup systems, yeah. So the reason why we have invested in that is primarily because even before load shedding, there was always challenges in terms of the conventional electricity into the ports, and that is why we invested in that. So when load shedding issues came, it hasn't necessarily been a problem. So the only port that we had some bit of challenge in as far as these issues is concerned is the Maseru Bridge, port of entry into Lesotho. There we had some bit of challenges, and we had to replace the machine, as it were. So up to this point, I wouldn't say that there hasn't been any challenge in as far as that part is concerned. Back to the issue of technology. So you will note that we had multiple technologies scattered across the departments that were deployed into the ports itself.
Yes.
So what we are doing now, working together with the South African Revenue Services, is to work on a single window view where we are going to be integrating these systems in the background in order to make sure that we are able to operate all of them at once. In that way, we are able to make sure that the movement then becomes more seamless. But the next step is to also align our systems with our neighboring countries. I think you will be aware of the concept of a one-stop border post that we are working on. So in that context, we will be able to synchronize our systems with our neighboring countries so that we are able to fast-track the movement between our borders.
I wonder at this point what the costs associated of all, in terms of implementation has been since the rollout. The jobs that you've spoken about, we've taken people from the different departments and integrated them. How specialized have their functions become? Because I'm just trying to understand how this is going to mitigate against the issues of corruption and abuse that we've seen at the multi-pronged approach level.
Yeah, you see, the issue of corruption obviously is one area that has been very problematic in the Republic, over the years. But of course, one of the facilitators of corruption in the port environment has been the fragmentation. So that on its own has been a facilitator. But once you then integrate the functions and then you create a single command and control, and at the same time you are able to make sure there is more technology on the space, that on its own is already a mitigation from a corruption point of view. I mean, for instance, when we then fully roll out what we call the biometric movement control system, where everybody entering the Republic will have to have their biometric taken. Yep. You couldn't therefore have any kind of an arrangement with anybody who is carrying a passport but not necessarily corresponding with their fingerprints and all of that. So that on its own is already a contribution factor. But the other issue that is key is that in the Border Management Authority Act in Section 13, everybody to operate in the BMA by law has to go through a vetting process. That on its own is going to start helping us in terms of addressing the issues of just basic corruption, to the extent that we will be doing what we call your annual lifestyle audits on the individuals deployed at the ports. But the other thing we'll be doing, obviously, is also rotating the officials, because that also is very much critical. Because in many instances, when people are in one place for a longer period, they end up now interacting with people, and then they end up creating those syndicates and all of those issues. So all of these interventions will be coming into the space to be able to help us to address the issues of corruption.
Well, thank you for your time with us on the SABC and for outlining that. The next phase obviously comes into effect the 5th of October. So we'll have to monitor developments and see how it unfolds from here into. But Commissioner of the Border Management Authority, Dr. Micheal Masiapato, joining us in studio, unpacking the significance of these developments, perhaps surrounding President Cyril Ramaphosa launching the Border Management Authority on the 5th of October, obviously in one of the busiest ports, Beitbridge. So we'll have to see what unfolds from here into.